Hi folks, Canadian Prepper here. I want to talk a bit today about something I've observed and it's sort of been in the back of my mind for a long time, and that's the lack of representation of specialized individuals from the arts and sciences in the prepping community. Well, I see a lot of laymen, and I see a lot of there's a couple doctors, even I believe, MD Prepper and Dr. Bones, Nurse Amy's channel, and there's even a couple nurses in there, a few nurses I should say, but there's very few people who specialize in other areas regarding arts and sciences, researchers, scholars, academic, professors, things of that nature that really dabble in any of this kind of stuff, unless it's from sort of an anthropological viewpoint of trying to understand, the subculture of preppers themselves. And this is not to discount the practical knowledge and skills of people who don't possess university degrees, but I do think that there's definitely an underrepresentation of academics and intellectuals within the prepping community. Fortunately, there are a lot of people who, even though in spite of their lack of credentials, and I'm going to explain why I don't believe credentials to be the end-all and be-all either in a minute, but in spite of their lack of credentials, are very broad in their perspectives, and many people I know that I advocate the jack-of-all-trades approach, which is to say that preppers are inherently self-sufficient, that prepping is a disposition in which one must know a little bit about everything, and specialization, unfortunately, in the post-apocalyptic WROL is not something which is going to be done, mainly because of the lack of security. In order for specialization, you need a functioning society. The more functional a society is, the more specialization you can have, because of the security factors, because you have somebody, getting wood, you have somebody getting water, and then you have some guy working on, biology or medicinal treatments or something like that. Now, part of the reason why I think that university credentials are overrated, and I should say that, I do have an honors degree in psychology, and I plan on doing a master's degree in counseling at some point. But what I do think about the academic industrial complex, and I've used that term ad nauseum in my critiques of academia, is that a lot of people who are in academia are blissfully ignorant to the fact that a lot of the funding for their research comes from agencies which are in some way or another mandated through the government. There's certain research projects that are mandated that sort of reinforce the status quo, and a lot of the research that people are mandated to conduct, it's not stuff that is, on the cutting edge. The stuff that's on the cutting edge is done in secret, in military bunkers somewhere, and that's for the purpose of protecting the information, because the last thing, as I've talked about before, people want to happen, or the powers that be want to happen, is that for quote-unquote enemies to reverse engineer something. And that can happen when your knowledge is out there in scientific journals. So the stuff we see in scientific journals isn't the end-all and be-all. In fact, I would say that for the most part, it's probably 10 to 20 years behind what's actually out there. That said, it does say a lot about a person when they've proven that they're willing to commit 4 to 8 years of their life looking to master a quote-unquote master a subject of study in the arts and sciences. And without that emphasis in the arts and sciences, it's going to be very hard for a society to evolve to a level that we sort of recognize today, or to a sophisticated level. Otherwise, you're going to have a bunch of militant, sort of ex-military, ex-cops, whatever, running around trying to rebuild a society, and we all know how that's going to end up. Some people might argue, there is an argument out there I've heard about how generals are in fact the best leaders, and that, but for me that's a military dictatorship. And I think there's a few reasons why I believe that academics are turned away by the prepping community. For one, they're the most brainwashed. And what I mean is that they're the ones who have the most vested in the system as it stands. Because if you're specialized, you recognize that that your credentials don't mean jack in a society where the system is not being propped up by the various agencies that it is right now. So it's probably for the better that you just ignore all this stuff. Probably not for the better, but for your own personal blissful ignorance, it's probably for the better that you just pretend like none of this stuff is ever going to happen and come to pass. Because for you, your PhD and your research relies on all of the system functioning as it has, and for it to not change as we know it. And indeed, some of the brightest minds are also the most brainwashed. And how can they be the brightest and the most brainwashed? Well, as I've said, I know many people with PhDs who are exceptionally intelligent people when it comes to looking through their little window into the world, whatever that may be, through physics or psychology or chemistry, biology, whatever the case might be. But the problem is in their lack of ability to string it all together. The interdisciplinary aspect has all but been lost. If you look at scientists of the past, they were interdisciplinarians. They were like Da Vinci, he wasn't just a engineer, he was an artist. He dabbled in issues regarding physiology. There's all sorts of crossover. And what you have now in a specialized system, you have further advancement of everything, but chemists can no longer tie their own shoelaces. People can't really see outside their quote-unquote scope of practice. But I do believe that we still need more of this represented in the prepping community. And I think it would raise the prepping community to an elevated level. And perhaps, part of the other reason why they're turned off is because there is so many, it is sort of a layman's game. I mean, it is the ex-military man's game. It's a lot of it does revolve around guns and security and stuff like that. A lot of the self-sustainability stuff too is quite rudimentary from their perspective, and perhaps not that interesting to them on a lot of levels. But I think primarily the two main reasons are that one, the brainwashing factor, in that they're led to believe that that the system as it is now is how it should be, and then the other factor that without this system their PhD is meaningless. But it's very important that these people are included in the community. Otherwise, I would not trade what we have now, in spite of how bad it is, the monetary system, the environmental degradation, the inequity and all that stuff. I would not trade it so that we could be run by a lot of the people I see on here who, show very little interest in things outside of military strategy and stuff like that. Now, this is not to say that just because a person is a military strategist or has training in that area that they cannot have insights into other areas and cannot, are not able to specialize in other things. There are people who work for the military who are also designated, in terms of science and communications, stuff like that. But I do think that, it's very dangerous to have such a lopsided, sample of the population. And it would be ideal if we could have a nice cross-section of an equal cross-section of sample of the population when we're talking about preparedness. Lastly, I think they're just too busy. I think students, scholars are so busy trying to, get grants, trying to, do their research. It's very stressful work having to prove yourself to all these various committees and, get your funding, recertified or whatever. That there's just no time for them to come on YouTube and make videos like this, And maybe they're out there and they just don't say a whole bunch. And I think they probably, if they do enter prepping, it's from the self-sustainability viewpoint. It's not from really a theoretical viewpoint, which a lot of us talk about these kind of things. In the theoretical, we discuss possible scenarios and how we sort of have a broader perspective, which is inclusive of security. A lot of people who are indoctrinated in the liberal arts and sciences do have a progressive slant, so there is naturally a aversion to guns and personal protection, which are largely demonized in academia. And I know this firsthand because I've been through the system, and I know that a lot of the compulsory courses, they ensure that people get just enough compulsory courses that they can insert some prime indoctrination into the curriculum somehow. Then again, academia teaches you how to reason. It teaches you how to strictly adhere to principles so that you can formulate objective conclusions and not be biased in your viewpoints. So there is definitely a place for it, and it's definitely one of the only ways that you're going to have a society emerge from a WROL that is intelligent, that is progressive, not in the sense of not to raise any political associations, but it's progressive in the sense that technology can still advance, that we don't have to, it doesn't have to be this reset where we go back to the Middle Ages, that we can still in fact build upon what we've gained thus far. It might be slower than to have the grid up, but that we would still be moving in that direction. Generally, people would still know how to make computers and things of that nature if you have computer engineers and if you have all these people on board. And it's kind of like an investment, like a lot of these like we've talked before in the past about how it might be important to protect the intelligentsia within your community, as they in the long term might turn the tables. It's okay that the pen is mightier than the sword, that old saying. And you might have a hard time getting going if you're carrying all these scholars with you in your party who have absolutely no practical survival skills. But in the long run, you will be far more powerful than all these other groups of people who know nothing but guns and self-preservation. So something to think about. It would be nice if there was more representation of the, dare I say, intelligentsia within the prepping community. You may think that there is. You may think that I'm off on this. Maybe you have theories as to why this is the case that I haven't touched upon yet. I'd like to hear them, because I do think it's, and sometimes I even wonder why I'm so fixated on the issue when I should be focused on, education and whatnot. And I think it's due to the fact that I emerged from that sort of truth movement subculture, and this was the next gradual step. This was the next step in that sequence of, for me. So I can understand why I went down that road. And I just don't know why there's not a lot more people. Because there definitely, when you get to talking to people about it, there is an interest. There just isn't a intense interest amongst academics so much as there is about, the average person who's perhaps has more time to dabble in these ideas. I used to call them hackademics, hacks, because a lot of indoctrinated academics aren't hip to hearing the idea that, hey, maybe you're sort of living a lie, and maybe it's not until they call you up, they call your number down to Area 51 or something like that, that you really start to get into meaningful research, and they don't want to hear that. I do think that the academics, the intellectuals, are mined for ideas. I do think that really all universities are kind of, and this is quite opinionated on my part, but all they are is just a place, they mine people for, if somebody stumbles across some research or stumbles across some discovery, they'll take that idea and they'll give it to their secret scientists and their bunkers, who will actually go and take that idea forward, and actually do something with it. And if you do have an idea that is important and actually can help people or help cure something or something like that, they will retract your funding, and they'll make sure it doesn't get off the ground somehow, some way. That's just my theory. That's how they've maintained the current system as it is. And I think that a lot of people just kind of roll with it, because everybody has bills to pay, everybody has mouths to feed, so they kind of just look the other way, and and so that's how the research only moves in a direction that is compliant with the status quo. Anyways, I'm sort of rambling on a bit here. Got to save my voice, got to work all day. So let me know what you think about this. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe if you did like the video, and by all means, please share. And of course, my tagline, got to start saying that. The prepared, or how does it go? The oh frick! I totally blew it. The strong survive and the prepared thrive. Canadian Prepper out.